They called him just a receptionist, but in a moment no one saw coming, he became the only one they could call. Jordan Lewis was 28 years old, openly gay, and living alone in a modest one-bedroom apartment in Philadelphia. He didn't own a house, he didn't drive a fancy car, he didn't have a husband or children to bring home for the holidays. But what Jordan did have was purpose. Every morning, he showed up early at the small community dental clinic where he worked. His desk sat right at the front, between a cracked window that let in too much cold in the winter and a squeaky door that never quite closed on its own. Jordan knew every patient by name, every birthday, every allergy, and every insurance hiccup they were too embarrassed to explain. To him, it wasn't just a job. It was where he made people feel human again. The clinic served everyone, from undocumented immigrants and struggling single mothers to LGBTQ+ teens who hadn't smiled in months. Some came in afraid of the dentist, some were afraid of being judged. But Jordan, he greeted them all the same with warmth, with dignity, and with a clipboard in hand that never left a question unanswered. He wasn't just the person who answered phones. He was the reason people came back. Outside work hours, Jordan was working on something else, a night course to earn his certification in medical administration. He'd finish his shift, take the subway across town, and sit in the back row of a fluorescent-lit classroom, learning about billing codes and HIPAA regulations while sipping vending machine coffee. On weekends, he volunteered for free medical checkups in local schools. He wasn't a doctor, he never claimed to be, but he knew how to organize supplies, calm anxious parents, and make the chaos of a crowded hallway feel like care. But none of that mattered to Kelsey. Kelsey, 30 years old, married to Jordan's older brother, Mark, had a smile that never quite reached her eyes. From the moment they met, Kelsey treated Jordan like a stain on the family photo. It wasn't his sexuality, at least not out loud. It was that unspoken disdain. The look that said, "You don't really matter." In her world, being a receptionist was a temporary job, a placeholder, something you did until you found a real career. And being gay, that was something people tolerated, like bad wallpaper in a guest room you didn't use. When Mark and Kelsey had their daughter Emily, Jordan was the first to show up at the hospital. He brought a handmade baby blanket stitched with her initials. Over the next 3 years, he babysat Emily every time they asked. Birthday parties, date nights, last-minute emergencies. Jordan was always there, never asking for money, never complaining, just happy to spend time with the little girl who clung to his leg and called him Unky Joe. But no matter what he did, Kelsey never saw him as anything more than a background character, a seat filler, someone who would never understand real responsibility because he didn't have a real family. Still, Jordan didn't argue. He didn't push back. He let it slide, again and again, because family was complicated, and love for him had always meant staying silent just to keep the peace. But silence has a weight, and every time she looked through him, every time she laughed at his jaw, every time she said, "Just a receptionist," that weight grew heavier, and one night it would break, not in anger, not in revenge, but in a moment when a child's life was on the line, and the only person who truly knew what to do was the man they always looked past. To follow what happens when quiet strength becomes the loudest act of love. Subscribe to Heart Story, because some heroes don't wear capes, they wear name tags. The dining room was warm with candlelight, the clink of cutlery, and the scent of rosemary chicken Elaine had cooked from scratch. Jordan sat across from his brother Mark, next to little Emily, who was happily nibbling mashed potatoes and talking about a story she heard in daycare. For a moment, everything felt almost normal. Jordan had brought a small tin of cookies to share, oatmeal raisin, a gift from one of his patients earlier that week. The woman, elderly and nervous, had come in trembling at the thought of sitting in a dentist's chair. Jordan had held her hand, walked her through the paperwork, told her silly jokes in the waiting room. When she returned to check out, she handed him the tin with a smile and whispered, "Thank you for making me feel safe." So, as Jordan recounted the moment, Not to brag, just to share a glimpse of something kind. He did it with gentle pride. She said I reminded her of her grandson, Jordan told the table. She even brought cookies the next day, said it was the first time in 10 years she wasn't afraid of the dentist. He chuckled lightly, glancing down, almost embarrassed. Then came the laugh, loud, sharp, from Kelsey. "Oh, please," she scoffed, reaching for her wine. "He gave you cookies for answering phones. That's not a job. That's waiting room decor." The fork in Jordan's hand paused midair. The table fell silent. Elaine's expression tightened. Her eyes darted between her sons. Emily, too young to understand, giggled softly, unaware of the weight in the room. Mark looked down at his plate, clearing his throat, but said nothing. Jordan forced a smile, one that didn't quite reach his eyes. He put the fork down gently, like something had suddenly become too heavy to hold. But Kelsey wasn't done. "I just think it's funny when people act like being a receptionist is a career. No offense, but you're what? Almost 30. You should be doing more than taking calls and scheduling teeth cleanings." No offense, as if that made it less cruel. Jordan stayed still, not because he didn't want to speak, but because he knew he'd been here before. He knew this dance, the slow erosion of dignity wrapped in sarcasm, the unspoken rule that some people get to measure others by checkboxes they've never had to fight for themselves. Elaine finally cleared her throat. "I think what Jordan does matters," she said softly. "And some of us wouldn't last a day doing what he does with half the grace." Kelsey raised her brows, amused but unconvinced. Mark still said nothing. And for Jordan, that silence cut deeper than any insult. Because it wasn't just what Kelsey said, it was the look in her eyes, like he was a harmless extra, a placeholder, a man whose worth was measured by the square footage of his apartment or the absence of a wedding band on his finger. He reached for his glass of water, took a sip, and smiled again. Not because he meant it, but because he was tired. Tired of defending a life that had never needed defending. Later that night, as the family said goodbye and Emily gave him a warm hug, Jordan crouched to meet her eyes. "I'll see you soon, sweetheart," he whispered. But in his chest, something cracked. He walked back to his car, the tin of cookies forgotten on the kitchen counter, and sat in the dark, the sound of laughter still echoing from the house behind him. That night, he didn't cry, he didn't rant. He just stared at the phone screen, at the family group chat, at the string of photos they'd taken, smiling, as if everything had been perfect. He closed the app and opened his medical billing coursework instead. If no one else would recognize the worth of his work, he'd make sure it never depended on their permission again. 2 days later, Jordan's phone buzzed just after lunch. It was a text from Kelsey. "Hey, can you watch Emily Saturday evening? We've got a wedding. It's local. Shouldn't be too late." No greeting, no smiley face, no apology. Just the assumption that he'd say yes. Like always. For a moment, Jordan stared at the screen. He could hear Emily's laughter in his memory, see her tiny hand grabbing his, remember her voice calling out, "Unky Joe," from across the hallway. But the echo of Kelsey's voice at that dinner table, her laughter, her words, her dismissal, it lingered longer. And then, for the first time, he let himself feel it. The burn of humiliation, the ache of being invisible in a room full of people who were supposed to love you, the realization that kindness, when unreciprocated, becomes a quiet kind of grief. He took a breath, then he typed, "Sorry, I'm just a receptionist. I wouldn't want to take responsibility for something so important," and hit send. No emojis, no explanation, just words, sharp, measured, and more honest than anything he'd said to her in years. The reply came fast. "What's that supposed to mean? Are you seriously punishing a child because you're mad at me?" Wow, real mature. I knew you were petty, but this, you're literally punishing an innocent toddler over a comment I made. You need help. Then came another. "You've always been jealous. Jordan, admit it. You hate that we have a real family." He didn't respond. He didn't need to. But a few minutes later, his phone rang. It was Mark. Jordan let it ring twice before answering. Mark's voice was tired. "Hey," he said. "Kelsey told me you can't watch Emily. That's fine. I wish you would have said something sooner." Jordan stayed quiet. "I mean, it was just a comment. She didn't mean it like that." Jordan's voice, when it came, was calm. Too calm. "It wasn't just a comment," Mark exhaled. "Okay, but this isn't about Emily. You know she loves you. And we're kind of in a bind right now." There it was again, the ask, the assumption that his time, his heart, his loyalty would bend and stretch to accommodate everyone else's needs, as if he didn't have limits, as if kindness meant availability, no matter how deep the hurt ran. "I can't, Mark," Jordan said softly. "Not this time." And he ended the call. He sat for a long time after that, the room quiet around him, the unanswered messages still lighting up the screen, one after another, each one louder, angrier, more desperate than the last. But in the silence, he felt something he hadn't in a long time: clarity. It wasn't about the cookies, or the job title, or even that night at dinner. It was about the weight of years, of being the reliable one, the easy yes, the invisible glue, and how invisibility, over time, stops feeling like humility and starts to feel like erasure. Jordan opened his laptop, not to scroll, not to escape. He opened the coursework portal for his night class and submitted a scholarship essay he'd been too scared to send in weeks ago. The title, "Invisible Doesn't Mean Unworthy." He didn't know what would come next, but for now, the refusal, gentle, deliberate, and overdue, felt like the first honest thing he'd done for himself in a very long time. Saturday evening arrived with clear skies and the sound of celebration echoing across Philadelphia's suburban neighborhoods. Kelsey and Mark were dressed to attend a friend's wedding. Rented suits, curled hair, a babysitter named Ava. They had hired Ava just the night before through an app. She was polite, punctual, and 20 years old. Kelsey had barely explained much, just left a few snacks, kissed Emily on the forehead, and rushed out the door in heels that clicked with urgency. Emily waved from the porch, still clutching her toy rabbit. At the reception, Kelsey posed for pictures with a glass of champagne in hand, the lace of her dress catching the light just right. She posted to social media in real time, selfies, cake shots, group photos with captions like, "Finally a night out, love this crew." One photo stood out. It was Emily, smiling in Ava's lap, eating a slice of cake with whipped cream and crushed toppings sprinkled across the surface. Jordan saw it an hour later. He had just finished restocking the front desk for Monday's appointments and was scrolling through his feed while eating noodles from a cup. He froze. The toppings on Emily's cake weren't sprinkles. They were chopped tree nuts. His heart dropped. Jordan didn't text. He called Mark. No answer. He tried again. Straight to voicemail. He opened the family group chat and typed only one line. "Emily is allergic to tree nuts. Did you tell the babysitter?" No one replied. Then came the call. But it wasn't Mark. It was a neighbor. Her voice was panicked. "Jordan, it's Mrs. Flanagan from next door. I think something's wrong with Emily. She's having trouble breathing. The babysitter doesn't know what to do. I already called an ambulance." Jordan grabbed his coat and keys without thinking. The noodles spilled to the floor as he slammed the door behind him. His heart pounded against his ribs like it was trying to escape. He didn't know if he'd get there in time, but he knew the ER. He knew the system. And more than anything, he knew Emily. By the time he arrived at the hospital, she was already inside. Mark and Kelsey hadn't shown up yet. Jordan marched to the triage window and gave his name. The nurse looked confused. He didn't wait. He scanned the hallway until he spotted someone he knew. Dr. Rivera, a pediatric resident who had once volunteered alongside him at a school health fair the year before. "She's allergic to tree nuts," Jordan said without introduction. "It's anaphylaxis. She needs epinephrine now. If you haven't administered it yet, you're already late." Dr. Rivera blinked, then recognition dawned. "Jordan Lewis, right," he said. "You ran the intake station at McPherson Elementary. Wait, is this the little girl from that event last fall?" "Yes," Jordan said. "That's Emily. She's 3. Her records should be under Kelsey and Mark Lewis. Her allergy is listed. Look again, Dieter." Rivera didn't hesitate. Within minutes, Emily was stabilized. Her lips were still swollen, her breathing shallow, but the worst had passed. When Mark and Kelsey finally arrived, breathless, frantic, still in formal wear, they found Jordan already seated at her bedside, holding her tiny hand. His eyes were glassy, his thumb brushing gently over the back of her fingers. No words were spoken. Kelsey stepped forward, but said nothing. She looked at Jordan, then down at her daughter, who was slowly blinking back to life. Mark opened his mouth, closed it again. The silence between them wasn't angry, it was stunned. And in that moment, none of them saw a receptionist. They saw the man who knew the difference between sprinkles and danger, the man who got there before them, the man who knew their daughter's file better than they did. Jordan didn't gloat. He didn't speak. He just sat there, quietly, exactly where Emily had needed him to be. The days after the hospital visit passed in strange, suspended quiet. No one called, no one texted. Jordan returned to work, answered phones, filed patient updates, and scheduled appointments as if nothing had changed. On the outside, he remained composed, professional, predictable, but something inside him had shifted. He no longer wondered whether they would reach out. He had stopped hoping they'd apologize. What mattered now was simple: Emily was safe, and when she needed someone, he had been there. It was late Thursday afternoon when the doorbell rang. Jordan wasn't expecting anyone. He wiped his hands on a towel, crossed the small apartment, and opened the door. Kelsey stood on the other side. She wasn't wearing makeup, no jewelry, just a windbreaker and a folded paper envelope in her hand. Her eyes were red, but not from tears, from exhaustion. Jordan said nothing. He stepped aside. She walked in. There was no small talk, no awkward attempt at niceties. She held out the envelope. Jordan hesitated, then took it. Inside was a printout, the updated medical file from Emily's primary care clinic. Highlighted in pale yellow was a new section at the bottom of the first page. In case of emergency, contact Jordan Lewis uncle, primary medical emergency. Contact relationship guardian, pending legal consent. Jordan stared at it, not because he didn't understand, but because for the first time in years, the weight of being overlooked had been replaced by something else: acknowledgement. Kelsey sat down on the edge of the sofa. "She only asked for you," she said quietly. "In the ambulance, in the hospital. When she finally calmed down, she didn't want me or Mark. She wanted you." Jordan didn't look at her. "I was wrong," Kelsey added, "about a lot of things, about what matters, about who matters." He folded the paper slowly, neatly, as if it deserved respect. "I didn't come here to beg," she said, "or to fix everything with one piece of paper. I just thought you should see that it's official. You're not just anything." Jordan's hands rested on the envelope. He remembered every moment he'd held Emily, every late night he'd spent watching cartoons on repeat, every birthday party he helped plan. He had never needed this recognition, but he had always deserved it. Still, he didn't gloat, didn't throw her words back at her. He just nodded. Kelsey stood to leave. As she reached the door, she turned back. "Thank you for saving her and for being better than we ever were to you." Then she left. Jordan stood alone in the silence, the sound of the door clicking shut echoing into stillness. Later that night, he placed the envelope in a drawer next to Emily's baby photos, and for the first time in a long time, he allowed himself to cry. Not from sadness, not even from relief, but from the quiet dignity of finally being seen for who he was, not what they called him. And in the eyes of a 3-year-old girl, he had never been just anything. He was everything. Have you ever felt invisible? Until the moment you were the only one who truly mattered? For more stories where quiet strength becomes undeniable love, subscribe to Heart Story, because sometimes the ones they dismiss are the ones who show up when no one else does.